Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to a view replay of a tank you don't see very often, at least not here on YouTube. This is the MT-25 and it's being driven by the YTS kid. This is obviously a 1.0 replay, but there was a fairly significant change to this back in patch 9.18. It got access to a 76mm gun, which was actually news to me. And it shows you maybe how much that I don't pay attention to the patches these days, that that particular detail escaped me until now, several patches later. But you don't really see it being played with that gun. I mean, it's practically the same 76mm that you'll find on the T-34. And hello ELC. Yeah, this is a 25-ton tank. ELC doesn't even quite mass 7 tons. Somewhat inevitable. Anyway, so yeah, the 76mm, it's not an option you see being used on this very much. It has a bit more pen. It does like double the damage. Is it quite double the average damage? No, not quite. It's just under double the average damage of this shell. Yeah, it's very inaccurate compared to this gun. Well, not very inaccurate, but rather more inaccurate. And so I think you're much more likely to see people sticking with this gun, because if you're going to be doing a lot of firing at things, it's probably going to be at relatively close range. Now, I still think of this tank myself as being the successor to the T50-2, but I suspect most people these days, you know, there will be some of you watching who will remember that machine, who will have played that machine, but I suspect more of you will not have than will. And so when this came out, it was regarded somewhat unfavourably in comparison to the T50-2, but that thing was just so ridiculous, coupled with the lack of physics back in the day. You know, you couldn't fall off bridges, you couldn't go down hills, that kind of thing. Well, you know, fall off the side of a hill. You could only go down slopes that had been designated as areas where you could move, essentially. So it basically ran around the place as if it was on rails. And this, well, it's still pretty fast. It's not quite as fast, but it's not too bad, all things considered. I think it is a decent tier 6 scout overall, although there are probably better ones. You know, when it's up against like the Type 64, for example, there is some fairly stiff competition there. In this case, however, well, it's Malinovka, and he's basically, you know, immediately run to a bush, gotten a bunch of spotting, and most of his own team therefore stopped dead in their tracks to just get all the things that he's actually shooting. I'm going to assume he's got optics on this, by the way. There's no binos. He does have the camo net and food consumable, so his base view range will be a bit better anyway, but I just have to assume that there's going to be optics, because what else would he be running? So he sat in a bush for a minute or two, and now he's just making a mad run at the enemy team, who really didn't get far out of their own cap either, possibly because he was spotting them, and you know, they were all getting shot at by his own team. And he's taken a little bit of damage so far. He's going to take some more, but he also did some ramming damage to that P-485M, because this is quite hefty for a light tank. 25 tons for the speed this thing can go at is not too shabby at all. But yeah, he's now lost most of his health as one of the other T-3485Ms is coming after him, and so he's got to be a little bit more careful at this point. But he's already gotten a pretty big chunk of spotting damage and managed over 1200 damage himself, which with this gun is not too shabby at all. Now he gets a bit lucky there. That guy completely flubs his shot, and his own team is now just starting to advance, but the enemy team's now broken already, basically, and it was largely because of him spotting so much at the start and the enemy team getting fairly locked down. Or maybe this was just a really passive enemy team to begin with. There's always that risk when you in a tank with good view range on this map, where you get to a spotting position, that your own team just does not advance at all. And it kind of worked out for him this time round, because his own team were able to just slaughter the enemy team very effectively. But it can backfire. It really can. So 2 enemy tanks left. This E2 is getting a thorough spanking. He's not getting any of this spotting though, unfortunately, but he's already gotten a whole bunch, so that's not too bad. The guy does bring his gun around, but fortunately somebody gets the finishing blow just before that happens. And frontally, he'd have needed APCR to get through that armour. He wouldn't have been able to do much otherwise. So I've sped up the end because it's a little bit anticlimactic, to be honest. He actually goes for the cap, as you can see. And I don't know if this is for a light tank mission he's doing this, but I'm pretty sure they easily could have taken that remaining tier 5 heavy tank. It was only a VK, a German tier 5 heavy. It doesn't have a lot of armour. So he ended that with 2,800 spotting and 1,400, nearly 1,500 damage done, patrol duty and scout medal, as well as a Confederate on top of that, and all of that was enough to get him the ace with just under 1,400 base XP. So it started off just being a fairly, you know, spotting from bushes game, but it got a little bit more action filled in the end, and you got to see the mobility of this thing in action. Although, to be honest, I more picked this out just because it's not a tank that you see very often, and it was on, you know, 1.0 Malinovka, and we got to see some of the bushes as they are now, and also it did get a bit more entertaining towards the end. I thought that was quite funny when he drove in like that, and the enemy team just absolutely were not prepared at all. And although he did nearly die, even if he had, I think they still would have won that one, all things considered. So that's it for this somewhat short replay. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.